Who was the real Zankou? That's the question. It's the ghost that has haunted Japan for over 50 years. The name itself is a bit of a trick. A red herring. Zankou was a name claimed by a copycat, an extortionist who tried to cash in on the crime of the century. But the real mastermind, the person who actually pulled off the 300 million yen robbery, never gave a name. He just vanished. To understand the ghost, you have to understand the crime. It wasn't violent. It wasn't messy. It was beautiful in its simplicity. It was a piece of theater played out on a wet street in broad daylight. The date was December 10th, 1968. It was a cold, rainy Tuesday in Tokyo. A gray car, a Nissan Cedric, was making its rounds. Inside were 4 employees of the Nihon Trust Bank, and in the trunk there were 3 metal cases. These cases held the winter bonuses for the employees of the Toshiba Fuchu factory. It was a huge amount of cash, nearly 300 million yen. In today's money, that would be tens of millions of dollars. The car was heavy with it. The car drove along a road next to the Fuchu prison wall. The rain was coming down, the wipers were slapping back and forth. Then, in the rearview mirror, the driver saw it. It's a police motorcycle. Its light was flashing, the siren wasn't on, but the light meant business. The driver, a veteran, knew the drill. He pulled over. A young police officer got off the motorcycle. He was in a full rain uniform. He walked up to the car with a sense of urgency. He told the men inside that there was a problem. A big one. He said the home of their bank manager had been blown up. It was a bomb. He warned them that the police had received a threat. They believed there was dynamite planted under this very car. You can imagine the fear. A bombing. Dynamite. The 4 bank employees got out of the car. They backed away. The young officer was calm, professional. He needed to check underneath the vehicle. He crawled under the car. A few seconds later, smoke started pouring out. Thick, gray smoke. And then he yelled, "It's gonna explode, get away!" The 4 men didn't wait. They ran, they scrambled for cover behind the prison wall. They were terrified, waiting for the blast that would tear the car apart. But there was no blast. The smoke swirled in the rain. When they peeked out from their cover, the car was still there. The motorcycle was still there. But the smoke was clearing, and the young police officer was gone. One of the bank employees felt a prickle of doubt. Something wasn't right. He walked cautiously back to the car. The doors were open. He looked inside. Then he looked at the back. The trunk was empty. The 3 metal cases and the 300 million yen were gone. It took a moment to sink in. There was no bomb. The smoke came from a simple road flare. The police officer was an imposter. The entire thing was a hoax. A brilliantly simple, perfectly executed heist that took less than 3 minutes. The robber hadn't used a gun. He hadn't hurt anyone. He had used fear and authority. He played a role and everyone believed him. And just like that, he disappeared into the rain. The police response was massive. It became the largest investigation in Japanese history. They threw everything they had at it. Over 170,000 police officers would work the case over the next 7 years. They interviewed more than 110,000 people. They collected over 120 pieces of evidence left behind by the robber. The problem was, most of the evidence was a dead end. It was all part of the act. The robber had staged a fake getaway. He left behind a getaway car, a Toyota Corolla, and in it he left items that seemed like clues. But they were all common, mass-produced items: a hat, a cookie tin, a magazine. They were planted to send the police on a wild goose chase. And it worked. The real getaway car was found months later, painted a different color. The robber had been 1, 2, even 3 steps ahead of everyone. The public was captivated. This wasn't a brutal crime. It was a clever one. It was a story of a lone individual outsmarting the entire system. People were secretly, and sometimes openly, rooting for the thief. He became a folk hero, a phantom known only by the composite sketch drawn from the bank employee's memories. A young man with sharp eyes. That sketch was plastered everywhere. It was the face of the most wanted man in Japan. But who was he? The investigation churned for years. Leads came and went. Hopes rose and were dashed. The police were under immense pressure. They made mistakes. They focused on the wrong people. They chased ghosts. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming. They had thousands of suspects, but no solid proof. And then a name emerged. Not from the police, but from the shadows of the Tokyo Underground. The name was never officially released, so he's known in police files and in history books only by a letter. Boyes Boyes was 19 years old. He was the son of a respected motorcycle police officer. Think about that. His own father was a shirabai, one of the elite white motorcycle cops, the very same role the robber had played so perfectly. Boy S knew the uniforms, he knew the procedures, he knew how a real cop would act. He was also a troubled kid, he was smart, but he was a delinquent. He ran with a bad crowd, a group of young criminals in the Tachikawa area not far from where the robbery happened. This group was involved in theft, carjacking, and other petty crimes. But the 300 million yen robbery was something else entirely. It was a huge leap. The police started looking at Boy S very closely. The composite sketch looked a lot like him. He had no alibi for the day of the robbery. He knew the roads around Fuchu like the back of his hand. The pieces seemed to fit. Too well, almost. His friends in the Tachikawa group were brought in for questioning. At first they were loyal, they protected him, but under pressure their story started to crack. They began to talk. They told police that Boy S had been planning something big. He had talked about robbing the Toshiba bonus transport. He had even tried to convince them to join him, but they thought he was just dreaming. They said he had been practicing casing the route. The police were closing in. They felt they had their man. The net was tightening around Boy S, but they never got the chance to make an arrest. 5 days after the robbery, on December 15th, 1968, Boy S was found dead at his family home. He had drunk potassium cyanide. The official verdict was suicide. A note was found, but it confessed to nothing. It just said he was tired of being suspected, that he was innocent, and he couldn't take the pressure. Was it a confession through action? Was it the act of a guilty man who saw no way out? Or was he truly an innocent kid, hounded to death by a police force desperate to solve the crime? His death was a bombshell. For the police, their number one suspect was gone. They couldn't question him, they couldn't get a confession. The case, which had seemed so close to being solved, was suddenly thrown back into chaos. But the theory of Boy S as the mastermind never went away. In fact, it only grew stronger. Over the years, more information trickled out. Friends who had kept quiet for decades started to talk. They filled in the gaps. They said Boy S wasn't just a member of the Tachikawa gang, he was its leader. He was the brains, he was charismatic and cunning, he planned their operations. The 300 million yen robbery, they claimed, was his masterpiece. They described how he had meticulously prepared. He had stolen the Yamaha motorcycle used in the crime. He had stolen the other cars used as decoys and for the final getaway. He had gathered the props, the police uniform, the road flare. He had studied the bank's route and schedule. He had planned it all himself. According to this version of events, the money was meant for the whole group. But after the heist, Boy S got scared. The police attention was too intense. He told his friends to lay low. He hid the money and told them he would distribute it later. But later never came. His death raises another dark question. Was it really suicide? Or was he silenced? Maybe someone in his own group got greedy. Maybe they wanted the money all for themselves and decided Boy S was a liability. The location of the money died with him. No one ever found a single yen. This is the most widely accepted theory, that the face in the composite sketch, the mastermind behind the perfect crime, was a 19-year-old kid who took the secret of the money to his grave. It explains almost everything. The inside knowledge of police procedure, the local familiarity, the criminal ambition, the sudden, tragic end. But it's not the only theory. The case remained open, and the police had to explore other avenues. This is where the name Zankou comes in. Almost a year after the robbery, a letter was sent to the bank. It was from someone claiming to be the robber. The letter demanded that a bank employee deliver another 50 million yen to a specific location. The letter was signed Zankou. It was a threat. If the money wasn't paid, the families of the bank employees would be harmed. The police saw their chance. This was their first direct contact. They set up a massive sting operation. They followed the instructions in the letter. They sent an officer disguised as the bank employee. They had snipers and undercover agents covering every angle, but the person who wrote the letter never showed up. It was a bust. Later, it was determined that the Zankou letter was almost certainly a hoax. It was written by an opportunist, someone completely unconnected to the original crime, who was just trying to extort money by riding the coattails of the famous heist. The writing style, the psychology, it didn't match the profile of the cool, calculating individual who pulled off the robbery. The real robber had his money. He had no reason to risk capture for a fraction of what he already had. So, Zankou wasn't the mastermind. The name was just a piece of noise, a distraction in a case already full of them. Terrible, but the name stuck in the public imagination. It became a label for the Phantom. The investigation continued. The police looked into other members of the Tachikawa group. Could one of them have been the real leader, with Boy S just being a key player? It was possible. One friend of Boy S in particular became a person of interest. He was questioned extensively. The police even got a warrant for his arrest, but it was never served. The evidence was purely circumstantial. They had testimony from informants, but nothing physical. No money, no fingerprints, no confession. Without Boy S to confirm the story, it was all just talk. The years passed. The case grew cold. The trail of evidence, already faint, disappeared completely. The public's fascination, however, never faded. The 300 million yen robbery became a part of modern Japanese folklore. Books were written. Movies were made. It became a symbol of a time when Japan was changing rapidly, a time of social unrest and rebellion. The robber was an anti-hero, a figure who beat the system and got away clean. And then came the deadline. In Japan, there is a statute of limitations for criminal cases. For the 300 million yen robbery, it was 7 years. On December 10th, 1975, exactly 7 years to the day after the crime, the clock ran out. The case was officially closed. The robber, whoever he was now legally free. He could walk down the street, announce he did it, and face no punishment. The day the statute of limitations expired was a media circus. News reporters gathered at the Fuchu police station. The chief of police made a formal apology to the nation. They had failed. The case files, stacked high, were a monument to their defeat. It was a day of national soul-searching. How could one person outsmart the entire Japanese police force? Even after the criminal case was closed, a civil liability remained. The bank could still sue the robber for the money if he was ever identified. That statute of limitations ran out in 1988. On that day, the phantom of the 300 million yen robbery was truly and completely free. He had won. So, who was he? Who was the real mastermind? We will never know for sure. There will never be a trial. There will never be a conviction. The truth is buried in time, in lost evidence, and in the grave of a 19-year-old boy. But the weight of the evidence, the logic of the crime, it all points back to Boy S. It feels right. The son of a motorcycle cop using his father's world as a costume to pull off the perfect crime. It has the ring of a Greek tragedy, a story of rebellion against the father, against society. He used the very symbol of order and authority to create chaos and get rich. Think about the psychology, the sheer audacity of it. To stand in the rain dressed as a police officer and lie to 4 men with absolute confidence. To crawl under that car, light a flare, and scream, "It's going to explode," knowing that the only thing exploding was his old life. He was stepping into a new one as a legend. If it was Boy S, his death just 5 days later is the story's dark final twist. Did the weight of his actions crush him? Did he see his father's heartbroken face, the shame he had brought upon his family, and decide he couldn't live with it? Or was he a loose end, silenced by his own crew? We'll never know. What we do know is what happened to the money. Nothing. It was never spent. Or if it was done so carefully, so slowly, that it never raised any red flags. But not a single one ever resurfaced in circulation. It's as if the money vanished from the face of the earth, just like the robber. This is perhaps the most mystifying part of the whole affair. What's the point of stealing a fortune if you can't use it? Some have speculated that the money was damaged, perhaps by water, and had to be destroyed. Others think it was smuggled out of the country. The most popular theory among those who believe in the Boy S story is that his associates found the money after he died. They were just street thugs, not criminal masterminds. They panicked. They didn't know how to launder it. They were terrified of getting caught. So they buried it, hid it, and were too scared to ever touch it again. Maybe it's still out there buried in a forest on the outskirts of Tokyo, rotting in a metal case. The story of the 300 million yen robbery is not really a story about money. It's a story about a ghost. A perfect crime creates a vacuum, and we try to fill it with stories. We want the mastermind to be a genius, a Moriarty-like figure. The reality is often simpler and sadder. The most likely candidate is a troubled teenager who is both brilliant and reckless. He pulled off a legendary crime and died less than a week later, leaving behind only questions. The name Zankou was a fake, a sideshow. The real mastermind was the young man on the motorcycle, the one who played his part so well that he convinced everyone. He convinced the bank clerks. He convinced the police for 7 long years, and in the end, he convinced history. He became a faceless legend, the ultimate symbol of someone who beat the odds and got away with it. Even if getting away with it meant dying alone with his secret, the truth is we want there to be a mystery. We are drawn to the idea of an unsolved puzzle. It's more interesting than a simple case of a kid who got in over his head. The Phantom of Fuchu is more compelling than the sad story of Boy S. But if you strip away the myth, if you cut through the decades of speculation and cultural obsession, you're left with the most probable answer. The man who masterminded the 300 million yen robbery wasn't a supervillain named Zankou. He was a 19-year-old boy, a boy who knew how to wear a uniform and tell a convincing lie, a boy who held a fortune in his hands for a few short days and then was gone forever. He was the ghost, and he took the answers with him.